Breaking news, rock stars. iZotope and Native Instruments have just released Music Production Suite 6, which includes an impressive collection of their best plugins and modules for production, mixing, and mastering. Ozone 11 Advanced helps you create professional quality masters from your mixes. I use Ozone all the time for mastering, and it's so easy to make my mixes sound like a finished record. Nectar 4 Advanced will help you get an instant vocal sound for music, dialogue, or rap vocals, with everything you need from auto level and tuning to EQ, compression, de-essing, effects, and harmony all in one easy plugin. I'm using Nectar right now to mix this vocal. And Guitar Rig 7 Pro brings you a massive collection of classic-sounding guitar pedals, amps, and cabinets for instant, amazing guitar tones. Plus, there are many more great plugins included like RX and Neutron, and they all have the Smart Assistant built into it, so you can quickly get a great sound and then adjust it to your taste. Just go to iZotope.com and remember to use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off. This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, iZotope, Atom Audio, Lovett, and Spectra 1964. In fact, you're hearing my voice right now on the Lovett Pure Tube microphone through the Spectra 1964 STX110D mic pre and C610 complementer with iZotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD and mixed on Atom Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the link in the show notes below. It's a great way to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
Stephen wanted the band to get their due. He was able to cajole them all into getting back together for this show that he had put together called Once Upon a Dream, which is the title of one of their records. And it was this multimedia thing, like 100-foot video wall, and he had pre-recorded the guys telling their story. It was the reunion of this band after 45 years or whatever, all the original members. And it was amazing.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. My studio is proudly powered by OWC, and I love how it's improved my workflow. OWC can connect all your audio work drives, trackballs, mix controllers, MIDI keyboards, audio interfaces, displays, or cameras so that you can work fast and focus on making your best record ever. Go look at the Mini Stack STX, Thunderbay 4, or Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at macsales.com/rockstars to find the perfect solution for your studio from OWC. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound kind of weak or distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding much closer to professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools, and the best part is that these mixing techniques work for you in any DAW, whether you're on Logic, Cubase, Studio One, Reaper, anything you can think of. If you're ready now to make your best record ever, then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Howdy, rock stars. It's your host, Lid Shaw. Welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Mark Prentice, a Grammy-winning record producer, studio musician, music director, and hit songwriter. His versatile and exhaustive music industry resume includes recording and performance credits with renowned country artists, as well as various internationally known pop, R&B, and rock and roll artists, including Elvis, Costello, John Fogarty, Jonathan Cain, Desmond Child, the Fairfield Four, Steve, Earle, Lyle, Lovett, and the list goes on and on and on. Frankie Miller, Amy Grant, Vince Gill, Don McLean, tons and tons of stuff. Stephen Van Zandt, very cool, and Bruce Springsteen. So if you want to see the full list of credits, that'll be in the show notes too. I met Mark in the past couple of years, actually, through mutual friends who gather to talk about music, life, and what the hell just happened to music in the world recently. And when I was invited to the annual Christmas party and saw how Mark could sit at the piano and play any song just by thinking about how it should probably go, I knew I was in the company of some serious musical talent. So very excited to have Mark here on the podcast with us today. Please welcome Mark Prentice to Recording Studio Rockstars. Mark, my man, are you ready to rock?
Yeah. Do you like fly in an applause track or something?
I do. I'm actually on a wire hanging from the top of the stage right now. Whoa, the rigging.
That's excellent, man. No, thanks for having me, Lidge. This is great.
It's great to have you here, man. So it's fun to go through, with all of my guests, to listen to the discography and sort of get a feel for like, where are they coming from? A lot of times I just have a gut feeling. I think the moment I met you, I had a gut feeling that this would be a great fit for the show.
Yeah.
But then listening through your discography, I mean, like these incredible recordings and records you've got, the Fairfield Four.
Yeah.
What's the story with that? I mean, just the first track on the playlist, you hit play and it's just like, incredible voice.
That's Isaac Dickey Freeman, who is no longer with us. Actually, none of those guys are, with the exception of the one new member. So I'll tell you that story. This is a really great story in my life. I had moved to Nashville late 91. I had been coming back and forth here because I got involved with the Lyle Lovett project, which actually came from Arizona. So that's a long story we can get into if we want. But I had been coming back and forth here a little and more frequently. And finally in 91 decided I needed to, be in or out. I was living here a couple of weeks a month and already doing sessions and writing. And I thought, I'm just kidding myself. I can't have 1 foot in and 1 foot out of this. And I'm getting involved in some, not to be some sort of Boy Scout, but I'm, playing some sessions. And there are guys who made the commitment to move here, and I'm in their chair today. So in or out, I just felt like I needed to make. And
what was the instrument that you were coming to play?
Bass predominantly.
Right,
yeah,
and that's your main.
I play keys and guitar, and fancied myself a guitar god when I was 17, 18 years old, and still play some of that stuff a little bit. But in the session world, I felt like, and especially down here, just felt like there's just about nothing you can throw at me that I can't convince you that I know something about it on bass, but I might play something great for you in piano in the key of G, and they'll go, hey, let's take this up a half. And I might as well just go commit ritual suicide, out of
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, I guess to be a pianist on a session here, you have to be able to play it in any
they're so great.
Key.
The people I work with here are so versatile and so great. It's not, way beyond just technicians. They're such deep musicians. And a lot of our world is deciding to change something to A flat or E flat on the fly, and hearing some of these people, I can do that on guitar or bass, but hearing some of these people that have come up with some beautiful intro in a white key, G or C or something, they'll go, let's do this in C sharp, and they play the same thing like instantly up, and so to me, I was like, yeah, I can bluff my way through about 75% of this, and then I'm going to show everybody my
That's
ass.
That's fascinating, because thinking about the different instruments and the skill level to do those key switches, I mean, I know guitar has a certain skill set that is unique to it versus a piano. You can play the same note in multiple locations. You can't on a keyboard. But being able to switch keys and play those riffs, that sounds, as a guitar player, that sounds like incredibly high skill. But then does the piano get the call for the session quite as often as the guitar does, and the bass and the drums? And
Yeah, and I think so. The thing about playing guitar is that, of course, there are a lot of things that work in guitar keys like A or E or something where you have open strings. And I'd probably been playing guitar for 10 years before I realized that you could use a capo on an electric guitar. That was like an acoustic that went right over my head,
Right.
And so the things in B flat, you can put a capo on the first fret and play that riff on A or whatever.
Yeah.
And a lot of the guys here, and I do as well, carry around one instrument that's also tuned down a half step, because a lot of the writers here tune down a half.
Just to E flat?
Yeah. Like Hendrix did, or like Zepp did live. And I think a lot of that's just for singing or whatever. But it's nice to have an instrument that kind of lives in that tuning, so you're not asking the truss rod to make a quick adjustment on the fly.
Yeah, it's trickier to drop the whole
but
guitar,
with
right?
the piano, where you're talking about the way you slur off a key, that's the real magic to me of playing up in some, playing an F sharp or something where that's not you're falling from a white key to a black key. It's not, again, that's way beyond my pay grade.
Yeah. I remember I was on tour and I borrowed a bass from my mentor at the time, Robin Eaton, who's also been a guest on the show and a good friend. And he loaned me this bass, and it had a little switch on the E string. And you just flip it, and it dropped the E down
it's a
to
hip
a D.
shot. Yeah,
it was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very
I was
cool.
Oh, it's nice.
And there was a really cool bass. You can still find these. I'm trying to think of what it was called. I think it was called it's not Shadowski. It's I can see the thing. I'll think of it while we're doing it. But they had this. It was a 4-string bass, but the E string actually traveled to D, and then there was like a little paddle that cut it where the nut would be.
Kind of like a banjo, kind of like the fifth
sort of
string
like
on
that.
a banjo.
So if you
hook it
lifted
into the
that
thing.
paddle, that string was a D, and there was a Jocko marker for the C sharp,
Yeah.
But it was just made it a really versatile. It was a really cool instrument. I got to think of what that was called.
And that's smart because then you're not actually changing the tension of the string.
Right.
It's like when you're adjusting the saddles on a guitar, or the bridge saddles, and the kind where the bridge saddle moves versus where the, I'm trying to think of how I want to say this. I guess on a telly, the bridge saddle sort of travels underneath the string, and on a Strat or something, it kind of moves the whole saddle, and it changes the tension of the string.
Right.
So where it's like I have to retune the string with one and not with the other.
Yeah. Well, if you can tune a Telecaster, you're wasting your time doing a podcast. You'll be the king of the world. Anyway, but anyway, Fairfield 4, I had moved down here, and I'd been coming back and forth, so I kind of had one foot in the door. But when I actually took residence here, very early in that deal, I'm going to say early '92, I got a call from a guy named Lee Olson, who was a booking agent and was the manager for the Fairfield 4. And he said, I need a vocal arranger to help these guys sing on other people's records. Well, I had done some of that kind of work. I mean, I'm not a schooled vocal arranger, but I sort of knew what I was doing. But when I came to Nashville, I didn't say, hey, I'm a piano player and a guitar player and a bass player. I came and said, I'm a bass player, So I hadn't put that out anywhere. And to this day, Lee's still a good friend. And I asked him, where did you get my name and number for this? And he said, man, I've got a desk full of, I don't know. And to this day, he doesn't know, right?
Yeah. So that's kind of like doing choral arrangements.
Well,
right?
it was so people wanted the guys to sing on their records, right? So just at that moment where he offered that to me or got in touch with me, I was aware of the Fairfield 4 because that's a Nashville thing. I'd never heard them. I didn't know much about it. And I was starting to get busy, and the couple of days he wanted me to do something, I couldn't. And I just said, thanks, but I can't do that. And it came back around. I've had this happen in my life 2 or 3 times. It just kept coming back around, And like the third time he called me, I could do it. So I there was we weren't really dealing with the internet at that point, but I went out and found some music and listened to it and thought, well, this is way outside anything that I've ever done. And this will be an adventure. These guys, they'll either love me or hate me, and this will work or it won't, but I should go take a swing at it. And the very first one of them I met with was a gentleman named Walter Settles. And Walter was probably one of the sweetest human beings I'd ever met with. He had a role in this particular record they were trying to put on. So Walter and I got together at a piano and just sort of got to know each other. But the way that so I went on and helped the Fairfields get on this record. And I got to remember, I'll have to look up who this artist was, but it was This was a thing that Jim Ed Norman was doing for an older black artist who'd been like a black cowboy actor. He was kind of a famous guy, and he was doing that song about this. It was kind of a recitation about the sweetness of the fiddle. It's an old poem or whatever the thing is. And they wanted the guys to sing on this. And at the time, Jim Ed's engineer, who was a guy I knew, and liked, but it was pretty apparent to me that he didn't really want them on this. Jim Ed had sort of given it to me, didn't really want them on there. And he was trying to get them to do sort of the Nashville thing, like say, you sing the root, and you sing the third, and you sing the fifth. And I came to understand very quickly that they didn't perceive music like that at all. It wasn't linear. It wasn't key-based. It was like another intelligence. It was like color or something. It was really, really amazing. And he had them in, with separate mics and headphones and cue boxes. And like those guys sang around one microphone for all of their lives. I mean, this was like putting them in outer space. They had zero idea of what was going on. And they were gentlemen about it, but they were just fish out of water. I mean, it was just the worst possible thing you could do, and so anyway,
the Fairfield Four, you're saying that the harmonic arrangements are
this was another intelligence. It really was a whole different. If you've ever read about, I think we tend to think of that there's only 2 or 3 ways to learn things, and there's probably thousands. But so this was a very unsuccessful thing. I don't think they probably ended up on the record. But we all became really good friends, and I instantly loved these guys, all of whom were in their late 70s at this point.
Wow.
Right. At least mid 70s. And so even though that was kind of a unsuccessful thing, there were a lot of people that wanted to do that, and they liked me. And so we began this process, and the Fairfield Four was a group that started here in Nashville, I think in 1929 or something. Wow. And they had a nationally syndicated radio show. They did it live from here, and I guess they shipped acetates across the country or something. And Sam McCrary was the guy, the McCrary sisters. Their, I guess it's their dad or it's their grandfather. I don't know. Anyway, so the guys that this thing all came up through, someone would leave or move on, and the next guy from another one of those bands would replace them. So the guys that were in it at the point where I was working with them were the continuation of that thing over the many years, but they'd been in other groups and stuff. And so they had a regular Tuesday night meeting at the home of James Hill, who was the leader of the group and retired Nashville cop or something. And they'd been doing this since the 20s. So there's sort of this combination of like Robert's Rules of Order and like a prayer meeting and a bunch of kids in a garage band fighting. I mean, it was just, it was so magic to go over to his house, and they'd have a song and a prayer, and then they'd read the minutes of the meeting. It was never much to it. It was like, last week these guys were here and somebody go, I second that, and whatever, And then if there was something going on, they'd like get in a fight, not, stay in their chairs, but I mean, they'd get in it.
Wow.
And then before it was all over, they'd have a song and a prayer, and they'd all go home and be friends. But it was wild. It was really like being with kids at a garage. I was like, wow, these guys are still this involved, So
it was very formalized.
Well, it was formalized in a way, but it was really, so I began to help them get on other artists' records. And what I think I understood about it was I kind of learned to speak their language a little bit. And what I really understood was you got to let these guys do what they do.
Yeah.
So a lot of my process with that was getting with the artist ahead of time and convincing them that the best thing they were going to get out of this would be if they let the guys do their thing, and if they put them out in the studio, you put a couple mics if you want, but basically around one mic, couple speakers out of phase. Don't worry about headphones. Get the experience, right? And then the next step of that, and I thought of this pretty quickly, and I'm so glad I did, is I would invite the artist to the Tuesday night meeting, and we'd kind of rehearse their song or whatever, but they'd get that experience, right? And it was no different if nobody was there or if Elvis Costello was in the living room. If they wanted to argue about something, they just argued about it. They didn't care. They did, and in some way too, that was really beautiful. Is they didn't really understand who any of these people were.
Right, because they're the old school, vocal group, and even Elvis Costello's some new kid on the block.
Yeah, and so the experience with him was in his tours to America, he loved to collect, records of all this really sort of uniquely rootsy stuff of all genre. And he was hosting a festival in London. It was a 9 or 10 day festival he did every year called Meltdown. And he was the director that year. And the way this thing took form, he could invite whoever he wanted to play on this thing. And there were shows every night. And it'd be this act and this act and this act. But then they'd have some impromptu, like, just decide to do a song together thing in real time. It was pretty amazing. So he really wanted the Fairfields to come to this thing. And their manager asked me if I would go. And I thought, I can't miss this, right? So he sent ahead what he wanted them to do. They were going to do their own little piece of the show, but then he wanted to sing a Van Morrison song called Full Force Gayle with them. And he had this song he had written with Paul McCartney it was actually about Costello's grandmother dying when he was halfway around the world, and he had always promised he'd be. It was called That Day Is Done. And he sent the work tape, like the cassette of him and McCartney doing this thing, right?
Wow.
And but with this strict instruction, like this can't leave.
Nobody else can get this cassette.
Yeah, no copies, no nothing, right? You can't, which is completely understandable, right?
Yeah.
So we worked on those things over here, and then we flew to England, and that was its own experience because I don't think any of them actually knew where they were.
Wow.
Like they just got on a plane and went somewhere, and they'd heard they were in the UK, and they'd heard they were in London, and they'd heard they were in England, and they'd heard they were in, this is not to paint them as ignorant. They just didn't care.
Yeah.
Get in a plane and then you're where you're supposed to be. And so in the tumult of this thing, we had the day before they were to perform, we had a spot at SIR over there for Costello to come rehearse with them.
Adam Audio can provide all your monitor needs. Whether you're setting up a first-time home studio for recording music or podcasts, or a world-class full-size studio for professional mixing and mastering in stereo or immersive sound. Featuring the XART tweeter and custom DSP onboard processing, the A-Series monitors will perfectly adapt to your studio. Get the Adam Audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for you with an extended 5-year warranty at adamaudio.com. So SIR, we have that in Nashville. That's basically a studio instrument rental and rehearsal.
It's rehearsal.
Space.
Yeah, I think they're all over the world, probably. They certainly are in London. Anyway, so we come in for this rehearsal, and we went through the Van Morrison thing, and he started to sing the tune that he wrote about his grandmother, which was accompanied. The Van Morrison thing was a cappella, but this had piano. And them doing their thing, which is that they react to the singer, it just stunned him, and I could also, I'd never met him before, but I could tell he was sleep deprived too. He's running this whole thing. Anyway, they went through it once, and he said to me, let's just do this tomorrow. Like, let's not, and, and so that night I'm back at the hotel, and Mr. Hill had a guy that was staying with him that was helpful to them, and he called me, said, and they called Mr. Hill Big Daddy. He said, Big Daddy wants to talk to you. So I came up to his room, and he said, so Costello don't like our singing, And I said, no, Daddy, it's the opposite. He loves this. He doesn't want... He goes, well, we shouldn't love it. Sound terrible. He was affronted, He thought the guy had brushed him off. He just didn't understand what was happening there at all, right? And so just to go into the kind of singing that they did, and this is something I learned from doing this, in that kind of a cappella, I guess Jubilee gospel, I might be wrong with that term, but this was where the lead singer actually tells the band what to do. So I could have flown in a guy of their vintage from that world, and they could walk on stage and do a show without ever rehearsing. So as opposed to like modern R&B music where, you know, the vocal group sings the thing and the artist responds, right? This is the other way around. The lead singer, as you're going into the next section, is telling them what's going to happen. It's really, really, really a cool form, right? And part of what that entails is it changes all the time, right? So I really am going somewhere with this.
No, it's good.
So
it's good. It's cool. Cool stories.
We get to the performance, first of all, and we're at the Royal Elizabeth Hall or something. And I don't know if you know about, you know, British audiences, but they're pretty secular. They're pretty
How many holes does it take to fill the Albert Hall? That's all
exactly. Yeah. But they're not real, you know, religious, right? I mean, they're kind of anyway. Fairfield 4 might as well have been in Birmingham. I mean, they do the thing they do, you know. And there were always 5 or 6 of them too, you know, and they had all this shtick where, you know, Mr. Hill would say, with Fairfield 4 from Nashville, Tennessee, I know what you're thinking. Them old guys can't count, you know, but he goes, it's just the name of the group. It got nothing to do with the personnels and this whole thing. Well, they're up there doing their thing and I'm out kind of mixing them. I mean, it's just singers.
Yeah.
And they get the room like lit up. The British engineer next to me his mind was blown. He's like, because they started this, you know, their whole rap about this. And he says, you know, if you hear something you like, stamp your feet, clap your hands. We turn this into the Elizabeth First Baptist Church, you know, and the engineer's going, oh, they're not going to like that. Well, they had people falling out, you know, they just, their energy was so cool that it like tore everybody up. So that was the first interesting part. So they come on at the end to do this reprise with Costello and they do the Van Morrison thing. And then they go to do That Day Is Done. And Elvis's father, whose mother this song was about, right? A very emotional thing for him. I mean, somebody he was close to and he promised he'd be there. And it turned out she passed away when he was halfway around the world. And anyway, so they start doing this and on the stage and Costello got really emotional about it. Well, that sent different information to the guys and they sang something they'd never sung before because he's the lead singer, right? And it just brought the house down. I mean, it was a really emotional moment. It was incredible, you know, but they just brought it to another level because they're reacting to his... It's like
improvisation.
It's like to his emotional content, you know, and if he phrased something different, they sang a different thing and it just blew up. It was great. And the thing that I remember the most about is I was kind of trying to get them back to the hotel and Mr. Hill had trouble walking. He was severely arthritic and stuff. So I got him out to the shuttle first and manager was getting the other guys. I was sitting there with him and he was quiet and then he looked over at me with this little grin. He goes, Mark, old Costello got singing pretty good there at the end, meaning with them. So he was back on the team, right? It was like, right, from the day before he was affronted and thought they weren't any good. And Costello loved these guys and came over and sang on the record that I produced and came over when we did the record release party for it and really was so reverent and great to these guys. And it was just an amazing experience. And I put them on all kinds of artists' records. And so when they were making this second record on Warner Brothers, it kind of wasn't happening. And they asked me if I would come, or their manager asked if I would come and produce it. And again, you know, this isn't, I just walked in and saw what was wrong with the picture. The engineer, who's a great engineer and a really good friend, was still trying to kind of isolate these guys and have some control over it. And I was just like, that's what's wrong. It's not happening.
Doesn't work for them, yeah.
We made this deal where we would get together on a Tuesday night and pick 3 songs that we'd like to record, and we'd go in either Wednesday or Thursday so they were fresh. And we'd meet everybody at the door and make them take everything out of their pockets because they're slapping the pocket full of change and keys and everything else. And then my deal with them was, hey, we'll go for these tunes. If we hit them, great. If we don't, we'll come back next week or we'll learn 3 others or whatever. And that's no headphones, you know, that they just did, and didn't need speakers because they're not listening to any music. And so, they're bleeding into all the mics and stuff, but it's magic, you know? And so when we finally had Costello come over and sing that song's on the record, That Day Is Done on the record, and he wanted Larry Knechtel. He flew Larry Knechtel in from L.A. If you know who Larry Knechtel is, he was piano player extraordinaire, Wrecking Crew. He was in the band Bread, and I mean Knechtel was one of the guys, right?
Right on.
And they flew him in for this. So we're up at this little studio that belonged to, that was Jim Ed's private studio up on Division in a building that's probably not there anymore. And we had this little meeting ahead of time where they're talking, well, we've got to videotape this. And I was adamant. I was like, no frickin' way. And not that I minded them videotaping it, but video guys, and if you're listening, I apologize in advance. They're the bane of my existence. I mean, they show up last. They want to put all this crap that makes noise, plug in a
move
bunch
the mic out of the picture.
Lights that make noise, and all they care about is what it looks like. They don't care if the performance. We went back and forth pretty hard about it. And what we finally settled on was I said, okay, here's the deal. I'm going to get the cut I need in the morning, and we'll have a little break for lunch, and then you guys come back and videotape a performance in the afternoon. And that's what we finally decided was okay. So I got this great take on and it's just a performance live. I mean, there's no punching anything. It's a guy playing piano and Costello singing and them singing with him, right?
So how'd you arrange these guys in the space for that, vocal, piano, and
yeah, okay. So the piano, was independently mic'd, of course, but
upright or grand?
It was grand. And the room up there, the recording room up there was probably, I'm bad with dimensions, but it was like twice the size of this room.
Okay.
So it wasn't huge,
Right.
But it was a wood floor. It was a studio floor. And they arranged the guys kind of in a semicircle, close enough to, a couple feet apart from each other. And they had a separate mic in front of each of them, but not close. And then Costello was facing them and facing the piano and singing. I got some pictures of it. Pretty cool. But anyway, we got this amazing thing, and we came back after lunch, and so the video guys came in, and I was, of course, I don't care at this point, move everything around every way you want it. And it wasn't nearly the ideal setup or anything, but they turned the lights on and rolled the camera, and I'll be damned, every one of them, including Costello, it was a better performance, and that's the one we used. That's cool. Because they were on, it's like, if you've been a performer all your life, I'm sorry, there's a gear you shift to, and no matter who you are, I think. And suddenly, again, I don't think those guys are so aware of being filmed, but they realize this is suddenly a concert and not a recording. So they respond to it in a positive way. Everybody took it up a level, and I had to, eat crow and admit it was a better performance. It was, Yeah, but I think you did a smart thing by making sure that you got everything that you needed together first. Well, it's nice of you to say so, but from the label standpoint, I wasted a morning, So anyway, but then I'm trying to look for which record that is. I think we have that in the show notes. We have a bunch of Fairfield. Yeah, that record was called, the title of it is one of the songs, and it was called "I Couldn't Hear Nobody Pray." Okay, great. Yeah. All right. And then Rockstars, please remember to go into the show notes and click through, and we've got a playlist of these records and Mark's discography there to listen to, and it's great stuff. Yeah. Let me ask you this question, because you mentioned something early on, and I like to always make sure we break it down for the rock stars who are listening, who are like maybe haven't experienced this before. Sure. But you said something early on about no headphones and two speakers out of phase. Can you explain what that is? Yeah. And how something like that actually works? Well, I think I can. So my understanding is that we'd put a small pair of like NS10s or something out there, small monitors. And that's out in the room where they're going to be singing. Out in the room, like on a couple pedestals facing the guys. Right? How big of a room? A small one that's echoey, or like a big one that's got... No, small. Maybe this size or slightly larger, not a huge space. Okay. We did it a lot of different places, but so the speakers might be 6 feet in front of them. Yeah, and when he says this size Rockstars, we're in my control room, which is about 12 by 18 or something like that. Yeah, so it might have been like a 20 by 20 room or something of that nature. We did record them sometimes at Ocean Way and stuff, but we'd still kind of do this. So the speakers would be facing them maybe at knee level or something on some pedestals. 6 feet in front of them or something like that. 6 feet, I would say. Yeah. And at a pretty low volume, but apparently them being wired out of phase prevents a lot of bleed into the microphone. Right, because when
where the two speakers arrive at the mic at the same time, if they're out of phase, I think it cuts out a lot of
stuff.
Mids and lows.
Yeah, so it just made it a lot more easy to deal with. You hear a little bit in there, but it was radically different than having them in phase.
And did you ever actually hear that radical difference? Did you get a chance to hear it in phase and out of phase?
Sure.
Okay, cool. That's to me is like, it's fun. Sometimes the sort of the science behind this stuff is intriguing, but then every once in a while you're like, wait a minute, has anybody actually heard it work? So it's very cool to hear.
Well, here's another thing that you'll see. This is how old I am, but in the early 70s, I was still a mere child, but I was in a band with some older guys. It was a pretty big production rock thing. And, we're singing into SM58s or whatever. And our engineer talked to this guy that talked to him about anyways, he built these boxes. So he would tape a second SM58 under the mic we were singing in, and they ran into a box where they were wired out of phase. So when you were not at the microphone, it was radical how much less of the stage noise it picked up, because we're playing through Marshall amps, loud.
Yeah.
So a lot of those things that you see with Zeppelin with two mics together and stuff, I always thought that's because they were recording them, and maybe some of the time it is, but I think a lot of it was that. And it was amazing what a difference that was. So when you put your mouth on the microphone you were singing in, cut through like crazy.
Yeah, but you had to be close to the mic.
You had to get right on it.
Yeah, you couldn't be a foot back or something.
It cut the you're playing on a stage full of loud amplifiers, and it cut it 70%. I mean, it was radical out in the room, and he showed us when we did it.
That's wild. Now, I remember seeing that the first time, and it was a Grateful Dead film where they were talking about the wall of sound, and they had a box with two skinny mics coming, and they'd sing into the top one.
That's probably why.
And I was like, that's what that is. It's wild.
Yeah.
And it's funny how, where did that tech go? I mean, I think things change. I mean, now stages are probably in-ear monitors a lot. So
there's not really any noise up there.
Yeah, the requirements have changed too.
Yeah.
Not to mention that live performances in general have changed a lot in the past, over the past 3-4 years. But
that's, I mean, I've did a couple of the last touring things I did were all on in-ears, and there is an up and down side to that, but the huge upside is the front of house guy is able to mix that like a record. He's not competing with anything from the stage.
Howdy, rock stars. I've got a secret to tell you about how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars. My secret is using iZotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron on every single episode. Right now, you are hearing RX breath control, declick, declip, DS, Deplosive, voice denoise, ozone multiband compression, neutron EQ, and limiting, all from iZotope. Go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off. I haven't seen anybody do that in the studio. It'd be fascinating to see if that double mic trick would work when you have the rest of the band in the studio with you too. It's no reason it shouldn't. It should, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You
just got to eat the mic. That'd be great to get a scratch vocal that doesn't have the drums and the instruments screaming. And I'm sure the cymbals probably still cut through.
It's just so a lot less.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. The real high-end information you're still probably going to have to deal with. But, in the circumstance with the Fairfields, you've just got 5 human beings singing.
Yeah.
And if there was a track that they were singing to, it was like the artist's track, and we could even take the high-end information out of that. They just needed to hear where they were.
Yeah, exactly. So 2 speakers in the room, 6 feet in front of the group singing.
Yeah, and probably,
they're all singing into one mic, like an Omni.
Yeah, or even just standing together as a group. There might be 2 or 3 mics around. The mic didn't matter because they're not listening to it,
Right.
So the engineer could kind of mic them however he wanted. But yeah, they essentially are, were used to most of their career just saying around one microphone.
Yeah. Well, I've noticed big time there's a huge difference between people's sense of pitch when they're just singing along. You work with an artist and they come into the control room and sing a harmony idea, and everybody's like, oh, that's great, that's so good. And then they go out to the mic, put on the headphones, and sometimes everybody's like, what the hell just happened? Where'd that harmony idea go?
Well, and not only that, over time, I have found that you can almost tune a singer with how much of themselves you're sending them in their headphones. So let me think about this. I think usually when they're hearing themselves too well, they tend to, the pitch seems to be a problem.
Right.
So when, you can dial them back and sort of get them in tune, it's interesting because they always want to hear more of themselves than they really should, or that's kind of a value judgment, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like, they want to be sure to hear themselves, but if you fold them back into the track a little bit, especially better singers, boy, that stuff comes right into the middle of the pitch.
I've absolutely noticed that before, where a singer will sing a harmony against the track, or they might even sing a lead, actually. And I listen to them like, wow, you just nailed it on that one. And then immediately they're like, hey, can I hear it myself? Can we bring the track down and all this? And they're trying to instinctively adjust it. But the truth is, like you said, sometimes not hearing themselves perfectly is the key to blending it into the track just right.
Yeah.
And I'm always reminded of those many differences, that whether the headphones are just in general loud or soft makes a huge difference. With the one ear off, that makes a huge difference. And I feel like a lot of times the takeaway is not that as engineers and producers, we have to memorize exactly what everything does, but to remember that there's 5 ways to do it. And if it's not working, try the other 4 ways.
Yeah.
Right?
And a lot of us that, have spent, half of our lives with the headphones on, don't like headphones very much. We think of them as the great liars, because they don't. That's an artificial environment. I mean, you learn to adjust to it, but it is. And
what are some of the big challenges playing bass in headphone land on a session?
Yeah, well, so, early on, I was just happy to have headphones, but then when I first got here in the early 90s, a lot of the time, bass players in the same room with the drummer and that kind of stuff. And everybody, what everybody was into in those days were like the Sony V6s, which are very high-endy,
Mm-hmm.
but they cut through a lot of stuff. And I would realize sometimes you do 2 or 3 sessions in a day and, you go out, come back after dinner and you think, how do I have these on my head? They're so loud. It's ear fatigue, as you go through the day. So then, guys started out using like some earbuds with like shooter's ear protection over them.
Yeah.
And then people started making those gun muff.
Yeah, the isolation headphones.
Yeah, there's several types, the
Vic Firth made
Vic Firth,
one.
great. Yeah, and there are these red ones that are kind of a higher tech version of that. And so I used those for a while. And then
and Rockstars, just a reminder, you could even get away with I don't know if earbuds have enough. They might give you some sound. You can always just put earphones in that are in your ears and then just put a pair of gun earphones muffs over those and get something similar.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where it all started. That's the first thing I saw was drummers, a couple drummers in town, Paul Lime and Eddie, I think, did that. They had some kind of higher end, earphone things, but they'd put the gun muffs over them so they could not, kill themselves. And then later on, had done some touring and had the artist buy me a really high-end set of in-ear, molded in-ear monitors. And that was a game changer for me.
Yeah.
First of all, these are like double or triple drivers, so there's a lot of low-end info. But I find that I listen at such a lower volume, and it can work all day, and I'm not turning them up. It's, it's.
I haven't noticed thinking we might be doing headphones on this, you brought your in-ears with you.
Yeah, I've just gotten to where I hate the feeling of headphones on my head anymore. I wore them for so many years, Plus I can't do a thing with my hair.
I also, remember hearing back then when I was, going into studios and there were these different headphones. The Tascam T20s were a very common one in studios, and I always just put them on and listen. I was like, God, I hate the sound of these. These sound just awful and everything. And then one day somebody pointed out that musicians would prefer them on sessions because of that very effect, because they were so dark.
Yeah.
And that you wouldn't rip off your ears with the top,
and
high frequencies all day.
I got to say this on the subject of headphones too, as this technology has changed, and I'm not a guy who argues with what is. I mean, I'm not some of my contemporaries and certainly some of the guys a class ahead of me, it's pretty easy to get them to bitch about the good old days and all that. But, I like still being in the game, so I don't argue with what's going on. But I think one of the things that happened when all of the digital thing became suddenly, the paradigm, right? Two things. People got all involved in, spending 20 grand on a new plug-in package, but the headphones sound like shit. And that's a pretty big deal when you're recording live musicians.
Yeah.
And that my thought about that was you might have been better served to spend half of that on upgrading your headphone system, making sure it's adequately powered. It came to a point where even a lot of the studios, I think in Nashville's pretty elite as a studio town, but you'd go in there and, so you'd have 3 or 4 sets of headphones where one ear didn't work or something.
Yeah.
So I think there was a class or a period of time, class of engineers coming out of Full Sail or whatever. It was all about what was happening at the desk. They weren't necessarily musicians, and just the headphones were like an afterthought.
Yeah.
And especially with these Q8 boxes and stuff, which certainly, have their purpose. I get it. But for a lot of my career, and certainly through the 90s here, you'd have a lot of people who were the recording engineers came to it through being musicians, and everybody's playing to a 2-mix, and those guys would put a set of phones on and hear what you're hearing and dial up a great 2-mix, and I personally would always prefer that. Now it's a dying art,
Right. So the engineer would listen on the same mix that the musicians are.
Yeah. You all had one stereo mix, that was kind of the deal.
What are some of the ways that you've seen as a musician listening on what works great as a headphone mix for cutting versus what comes out of the speaker? What are some of the typical things we might hear? How close does it sound to a record, like an engineer's trying to mix it towards, versus what's appropriate for?
Yeah, well, it's
mix?
probably very similar, but to me, the best way I can describe it is when the headphone mix is great, you feel like you're in a band on stage, And the multi-boxes that allow you to literally not hear one of the other players if you don't want to, is maybe good for your mental health, but you're not in the band at that point,
Right, exactly, yeah.
And it does cause some people to really overly emphasize themselves. And so I find, again, I don't play steel guitar or any of that stuff, so I really can't comment about it. But as a bass player even, I want to be in the band. I want to sink into the band because I'm going to express certain phrases, more loudly or more quietly based on what the emotion of the band is. And if I'm in an environment where I'm kind of mostly listening to myself, then it kind of becomes about this sort of pristine performance or something, but it isn't as musically dynamic or as emotionally connected to the music, in my opinion. Some of that has to do with the way I came up doing this, but I still I always say I like to be in the band,
Yeah.
And
it makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you just think about one of those things we discover when we're producing music and we're like, oh, when there's only 3 elements in a song and a mix, they have a different responsibility to the song. They have a different tonality, a different dynamic, a different fullness, and they require different parts versus a whole bunch of stuff going on at once. And it makes perfect sense that if your headphone mix is also reflecting that, you're going to play something that might seem appropriate for, the bass solo record, that Jocko record.
Sure.
Versus one that sounds appropriate for the Wrecking Crew.
Yeah, or just hanging on, you know what I mean? Sometimes you have a bad headphone mix, your mission becomes, let me play this song correctly to the click, and that's the thing I'm able to do in the moment.
Yeah.
But it's not a terribly musical experience, Maybe splitting hairs, it might mean more to me than it does to the final product, and it's not like people can't write a fader and put a compressor on all it, but I would love, ideally, I love it when you find a level for my bass track and it kind of works through the whole song without having to do very much to it because I was connected to the music when we were playing it.
Yeah, I find that for myself, playing bass overdubs on music here, my own music, especially with finally having a really great speaker system in the studio, I'm really struck. I'm like, wow, when you can, you notice right away when you're producing records that what somebody might come up with as a part in headphones could be quite different from when you bring the bass. If the bass player is going to do an overdub, come into the control room and listen on the speakers and really hear the kick and the snare clearly.
True. Yeah.
And it's remarkable the different kind of focused part, that can become a hook of the song. And, all the things we struggle with in mixing, like low end and stuff like that. It's like, duh, put down the right low end in the first place. And that's going to make a huge gain towards a great mix, right?
Yeah. And I mean, to that point, but before we do that, I think that, I'm going to try to not get too upset that you play bass on stuff, but I'll make a great deal with you. I won't do any engineering if you'll let me play.
We'll cut a good deal right here. It's going down here. Hold on, I'm gonna cut my hand with this pencil.
Oh yeah, you and me, buddy. That's right. I'm your bass player. Anyway, so again, through bass world, the different paradigms and the things that the sound and so on and so forth, and round wound strings and Chris Squire with 4 10-inch speakers and then
Speaking
picking,
of Paul McCartney,
whole
right?
different, right? Yeah, but. Then late in life, or I guess late in 90s, a really, really close friend of mine, a beautiful guy, great musician from California, passed away, unfortunately, and left me a all original 1960 P bass in his will.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really a shock because I didn't even know he owned it, and he. So the guy that was the executor of his estate out in Arizona called me and said, "Hey, Eddie left you this bass. Do you want me to ship it to you?" And I said, "No, we're going to be out there in a month or so. I'll pick it up." And he was also like a leather tooler and kind of a surf guy. So he had this band called the Eddies where, he had the guitars all leathered up like the Wailing guitars. And I figured it was this Telecaster bass I'd seen in a picture, which I would have been happy to have. But, that's kind of a novelty. Anyway, I go out there and here's this pristine 60. It's the holy grail of
straight
basses.
From Leo.
Yeah. And, all of the lacquers worn off between the 1st and the 5th frets. That's it, where all the money is, right? So that kind of changed my deal. I had been, like everybody else here, playing, active 4 and 5 string basses with round wound strings and all that. And I brought this thing home and had sessions all that week. And the second I plugged it in, I was like, oh, wait a minute. This is a whole different deal. So to your point, soloed, that bass sounds okay. It's kind of clunky and kind of, I don't know. But put it in a track with a piano or a kick drum and it's a whole different thing. And not only that, so with one of the higher tech basses, you can find, I'm doing this thing with my fingers where they're pointing at each other. You can find this level between, say, the kick and the bass that's right.
Yeah.
But if you move one of those things radically, it's like really wrong.
Right.
With the sort of Fender bass thing, you can move it really radically and it's just different, but it's not wrong. It's because of the harmonic, I guess, maybe the lack of harmonic overtones or whatever, but however it reacts. Now, is that the chicken or the egg? We grew up, everything I loved listening to was that bass played on something.
Yeah.
But there is a really magical thing about that. And even the engineers I was working with at the time were going, what are you doing? Because it seemed so radical, but it really was not. It was just, I'd kind of forgotten what that piece is. And that's a magic thing. It really is.
OWC is your one-stop shop for flexible drive storage and connectivity solutions for your studio. The Mini Stack STX for your Mac Mini adds 2 additional drives over a universal SATA HDD SSD bay and an NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD, plus 3 additional Thunderbolt USB-C ports. The OWC Thunder Bay 4 chassis, built like a tank, gives you 4 hot-swappable 2.5-inch RAID configurable drive bays, plus an extra Thunderbolt 3 jack for daisy chaining up to 5 devices. Or check out the OWC Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock with 2 RAID configurable drives and 7 ports of connectivity, including a front-side SD card reader, 1 gig Ethernet, 2 USB 3.2 ports, a dedicated display port, and an additional backward-compatible Thunderbolt port. Get your studio connected with the Mini Stack STX, Thunder Bay 4, and Gemini Thunderbolt 3 redock at macsales.com/rockstars. Use the custom link in our show notes because it's a great way for you to help support this podcast. So thanks, Rockstars. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session, a.k.a. the second half of the show. My guest today is Mark Prentice, joining us here at the Toy Box Studio.
Yeah,
chilling in the control room. Mark, you ready to jam?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about your background. Like, how did you get started in all this and come to Nashville? Just give us the brief arc.
Yeah.
But I noticed you're wearing a hat that says 315 and 615, and I think that's part of the story.
It is part of the story. So I grew up in way upstate New York, which is a 315 area code, and got interested in music like everybody else. I had a sister that was older than me. It was a Beatles maniac, and I had to get a guitar when I was, I guess like 12 or something. And then just after my 13th birthday, and by total coincidence, the Young Rascals played in Watertown. And I'm sure they played there because they had routed it on a date to Canada.
No, that's not the Little Rascals.
Before they had Good Lovin', before they had their big hit, and it was out by then. So they would have never played there again for sure. But I went and saw them that night, and it was life-changing. It was like, okay. And for those of us that grew up in that era on the East Coast, the Rascals were, they were like the American Beatles. And they had all this New York swagger. Like, we didn't like the Beach Boys because we liked the Rascals. They were a bunch of goofy guys in striped shirts, and our guys had swag, But that was kind of the thing that got me interested to pay a lot of attention and do all that. So by the time I was a junior or senior in high school, I was working 5 and 6 nights a week with older guys and making more money than the teachers.
So at this point, if you're a junior in high school and you can play like that, how'd you even get to that level of playing?
I think that the thing that sparked in me that night was just, I became so interested that I just was a sponge. I just wanted to learn as much as I could. There just never had a guitar out of my hands, I was just in love. I was infatuated, and I couldn't. Now, what was interesting, in those days is there wasn't YouTube and there wasn't all this stuff. So you had to go see somebody live. Fortunately, that area of the country was pretty fertile musically, partly because we weren't near a major city. So I think, we had to create it ourselves. The guys that were older than me really were great players. Some of them still, but that's all just self-taught, like woodshedding with a record and trying to figure stuff out.
Yeah, I feel like that's the Muscle Shoals story, really.
Yeah, or, you could watch James Burton on Ozzy and Harriet, but after half of a season, he figured out guys were zeroing in to watch his solos, so he'd turn sideways and stuff, because it was really the only thing you had. You had to figure that stuff out for yourself, But I was just so into it that I just couldn't get enough. And I come from, not in a professional sense, but a musical family in a way. My mom especially, her mom was a piano teacher. And my mother had these memories of sitting with her mom while her mother played for the silent movies and stuff. And
wow.
And my mom was, learned to play piano and read music and that kind of stuff. And my parents, I think my dad sang in the church choir, but, they were interested in music or whatever. And although this didn't mean much to me then, I think it really got in there. They would take us when I was very small. I don't remember what the deal was, maybe Easter time, but we'd go to New York City and I saw Sound of Music and My Fair Lady and The King and I and, all of this classic stuff as a pretty young child, Oklahoma, but I think that kind of harmonic information and that kind of sophistication of music just sort of got in the memory bank or something, so that when I started playing instruments, I was kind of looking for all of that stuff. And whatever gift I have, wherever that all comes from, I think I discovered by the time I was a senior in high school. Like, I took a music theory class because I had to take something. And that was just language for something I already understood. I came to understand pretty quickly that, like, well, I hear all these intervals. Like, I understand what that is, so I know if we were in C, that'd be A minor. So if we're in E flat, that's C minor. And then this brilliant little guy gave me the language for all of that, to understand the relationship between all these things. But I just was obsessed with playing, and I'd sit endlessly working out solos and all this kind of stuff. So I was kind of...
Because you were playing a lot of guitar, too.
I was a guitar player, period, in those days. Yeah. And, well, I say that, but the first paying gig I had, they needed a bass player when I was 15, and so I made a deal with my dad for a little bit of money and bought a bass and learned all their songs in 2 weeks. But they were making money. You know, these were older guys playing every weekend for dough. And as soon as they graduated from high school, I went back to guitar. And I was kind of the wonder kid in our little town and ended up working with guys 10, 12 years older than me.
That's fascinating. That's
doing all that. Yeah, it was great.
And then you came down here in 91, which is when I came to Nashville.
Right. Well, in the period prior, I had moved to Arizona. I lived in Arizona from 76 to 91.
Playing professionally out there, too?
Well, eventually, yeah. I when I went out there, I wasn't playing at all. I sort of, you know, as young people will do, I sort of destroyed my health, you know, bad habits and bad substances and all that kind of stuff. And I wasn't, you know.
So you were in Arizona in the 80s, like Phoenix?
Yeah.
That's where the Meat Puppets were coming from.
Yeah, I actually worked with them.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Oh, my God. Tell us that story.
Yeah.
Rockstars, you're here now. You heard it on
so I didn't play
Rockstars.
on anything with them, but their engineer was a guy named Steve Escalia. I think Steve's still alive. And he was doing this record with them at a studio out there called Chaton. It belonged to this really wealthy family that had built this studio behind their house. They were super rich. I don't know why they did that. You know, it had all these vagabonds hanging out.
Isn't that where, that's how studios get built, right?
Yeah.
People just take money and spend it.
Yeah, well, and she was her name was Ravenscroft. She was a Wilkinson, though, like the Wilkinson sword razor blade British family.
Right, wow.
And she was a classical musician, and she loved musicians, and they built this. I think, you know, she probably had a lot of occasion to second guess that decision because there are a lot of pretty sketch characters hanging out in a pretty Tony neighborhood. But anyway, Steve would have me come out, and the record they were doing at the time, they had decided to just record the whole album in sequence live like twice a day, you know, for, I don't know, a week or something. And they wanted another set of ears to just sit around and kind of tell them what they were going on. And I don't know, I can't tell you what record that was, but I remember that they were struggling with album titles. And one was Poop Oil and the other was Eat My Total Shit. They were trying to decide what the title of the album should be. So that was my Meat Puppets experience. They were great guys. They were hilarious.
We've had Derek Bostrom on the podcast to talk about playing drums with those guys. I mean, to tell the story. So what a trip that you were there at that time.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be like middle 80s somewhere, 85, 86, somewhere.
And of course, I was learning about them when I was in college, 86 to 90. And you know, discovering that stuff, and they were one of my favorite bands.
Gin Blossom's out there too. Those guys were an Arizona deal.
Right on.
Yeah. No, and I played a lot in the studio out there, but a lot of that was, you know, custom projects for people, and then a lot of ad music. I had a partner eventually, and we did a lot of stuff, and you know, those were the days where you'd have to, if you wanted to lay back some music to video, you had to go to L.A. because nobody had the equipment in Phoenix. Is so crazy now. You can do it on your phone, you know, but that just sounds ridiculous. But we'd have to go over there and rent a studio, the SMPTE time code. And it was like, you know, this sort of
line up those sprockets
alchemy thing. Yeah, crazy. Wow. But anyways, and also while I was there, I ended up working quite a bit in LA because you could fly over there 10 times a day for $35 or something. And one of the magic things that happened to me there in the late 80s, the drummer Hal Blaine moved there, kind of semi-retired. And for those of you not familiar with Hal's name, he was the drummer in the Wrecking Crew and probably the most recorded. He might be the most recorded musician in history. I would think he's certainly the most recorded drummer, especially of the, you know, these seminal records. So while we all thought these people were all bands, the truth was it was the Wrecking Crew. And, you know,
that was the LA session group.
Beach Boys, Carpenters, Grassroots. I mean, you name it, you know, it was this group of people and, you know, they didn't want kids to know that because those guys were, you know, they weren't old, but they're in their late 30s or something at that point, a bunch of guys sitting around in chairs, you know. And so like the Monkees, that's the classic Wrecking Crew story where, you know, the Wrecking Crew cut all those records.
Are they playing on Pet Sounds as well?
Oh, yeah. And if you ever, there's that movie, John Cusack does this movie, I think it's called Love and Mercy or something. It's a Brian Wilson thing. And they're in there a lot while they're doing that. And the character that comes out and tells him in the parking lot, you know, that all the guys really respect him is the Hal Blaine character. And that would have been Hal. I mean, anyway, so I was well aware of who he was by then.
Yeah.
And he moved to Phoenix, some kind of semi-retirement situation. One of the studios I worked at a lot there found out he was there. And so they would hire him to play on all this stuff, right? And they hired me to play with him. And so I had the opportunity to play a lot with Hal. Now, none of this was on anything that was very momentous, but he was at that time writing his book. He actually wrote a book called The Wrecking Crew, and he was compiling his discography at the time. And as you know, again, not everybody had a fax machine, so they're faxing all this stuff to the studio. Right. We'd go in there to do a session for somebody, and he'd be pulling these union cards and going, "Oh yeah, I forgot about that. You know, I forgot about that, like MacArthur Park or something. You know, forgot about all this stuff he played on." But I had, like, again, one of those huge light bulb moments with Hal. So,
and you're playing bass on these sessions? I was playing bass on all this stuff pretty much. I'd overdub piano sometimes, but pretty much playing bass with him. And he and I got along right away, very personable guy. I mean, I understood not just his talent, but I understood why he was a successful studio cat, because he's somebody you want around, you know? And, you know, we would do these custom records for like you know, maybe a music minister from some church out there, and they'd come in and play some 7-minute song that changed tempos and maybe even time signatures. And he was never big time in anybody, and he's so patient with them. But he'd say, no, just play it through beginning to end, you know, and he'd write his drum chart. And I think in all the recording I did with him, we maybe stopped the tape on his account 2 or 3 times. And there was a situation, the one I'm describing right there, where we had this song, and he just lead you through these changes. You know, it might not have been exactly the way that the person was going to do it, but you couldn't miss it. He'd take you there, you know? Yeah.
And there was one where about 2/3 of the way through, I just got lost. And I stopped. I thought, I'm just going to mess this up. And then she realized I stopped, so she quit playing, and Hal just played the track to the end without us.
Wow. He's like, now you got the drum track.
And it was perfect, you know? He didn't lose any energy. It didn't rattle him that we stopped playing. So anyhow, there were a couple guys from LA that discovered he was there, and they would bring projects over there because they wanted to do them with Hal, also because the 2 or 3 guys I can think of were pretty much posers, and they didn't want to, you know, they wanted to go out of town and do something, bring it back. And, you know, so the one guy in particular rubbed me the wrong way. And I was over there one day and just having a terrible time with him. And I'm sure I was catching an attitude and all this stuff. And Hal grabbed me out in the hall, and he said, "Hey, you okay?" I said, "Yeah, man." I said, "This is, you know, this guy's an idiot, and I'm not who he wants here. This is ridiculous. You know, I don't even know what I'm doing here." And he took me by the shoulders, and he said, "You know, I've replaced almost every famous drummer you can think of on a record." I was thinking, all right, non sequitur, but cool, right? He said, "I've also been replaced by about every famous drummer you can think of on a record." And he said, "Here's the deal, man. And listen, if you want to be a recording session musician, I don't care what the technology is. I don't care. If you only know this, you're 90% of the way there." He took me by the shoulders. He said, "Here's the deal, man. You're the cat on the date." He said, "You know, it's your job to look at this guy and figure out what he wants and give it to him the best of your ability with love in your heart." And he said, if the next time, just tell him you're busy or just say no. But today you said yes, and you're the cat on the date. Well, what that meant to me was first of all, I'm listening to God, you know. And second, he was kindly saying, "You're harshing the vibe here, dude. You know, like You're letting me down." But he didn't say that. He said, "This is the philosophy." And he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. That was one of those things where you make this little shift in the way you look at things and think about it. I got along with that guy great after that. It was just putting your focus on the thing that was important, you know?
Yeah.
I was there to do this thing for this guy. I wasn't his adversary, you know? I was there to help him. He'd mustered the wherewithal to pay me to record, And my half of that agreement is I'm going to try to give you what you want.
Yeah.
And, Hal's point was you walk out of the building, they might replace everything you played. That's not your problem.
Yeah.
You're the guy here in the moment. You're the cat on the date. First of all, that's great 60s lingo,
Yeah.
But that really is, I know I've been able to impart that to both of my sons. That's the deal.
And your sons are both playing professionally now too?
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, if you're going to pick your instrument up, it's 0% or 100%. Either say no or do the very best you can. If you agree, there's no 80%, 90%, 95%. Screw that,
Adam Audio introduces the all-new A-Series line of monitors, featuring the XART accelerated ribbon tweeter design, built-in DSP-based room correction, and speaker voicings, allowing you to customize your Adam Audio monitors to your control room. The A-Series will rock in any studio. Small studio spaces or immersive multi-speaker configurations are perfect for the A4V or the new A7V, the next generation of the incredibly popular A7X. Mid-sized rooms and narrow spaces will love the low-profile A44H, expanding on the A7V sound, or the A77H, a true three-way midfield monitor delivering rich, spacious sound. And bigger studios will love the A8H, a three-way speaker and the pinnacle of the A-Series that delivers extremely accurate sound required for critical listening environments. Get the Adam Audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for your studio with an extended 5-year warranty at adamaudio.com. So a couple of takeaways from that are, one, you don't necessarily know where your no's are going to land until you experience them. Mm-hmm. So by definition, we're going to find ourselves in sessions that just suck.
Yeah.
And we have to have that mindset to be able to go through them and maintain that focus on delivering to somebody. And I find that the more I adopted that mindset, the less those sessions suck too, because then I just stay focused on delivering.
Right.
But then the next hard part of that equation is you have to be able to take mental notes. You have to keep a mental log. You got to write it down. You got to remember so that next time when it comes around, because sometimes those invitations to do sessions, they catch you at off moments where you're not fully focused. So,
yeah. And so this is a bit of a tangent, but I'm going to do it anyway. Right. So this applies certainly to this whole studio thing, but this is sort of like a larger life application. And this was another light bulb moment for me, I don't know, a couple decades ago. If you're feeling it, it's you. I mean, you don't have to look, nothing's happening to you from the outside. It really isn't, You can't control the situations you're in, but you have 100% control over your reaction to them. Mm-hmm. And so much of that gets completely diffused if I'm not resisting, if I'm not fighting.
Right.
If I'm the cat on the date, if I'm going to do 100%, I don't care if on the, and I've learned for this too. So on the surface, your idea might seem goofy to me. I'm like, really? Half the time, those things turn out to be super cool and they're another arrow in my quiver. But the other deal is it takes longer to argue with you about it than it does to just audition the idea and see if it's cool or not. And usually if it's goofy, the guy will veto his own idea. This is the creative process we're in. Every time I think, hey, that's a goofy idea, I think, hey, that's your ego, bro. You're saying, I know how to do this and you don't. Bullshit. Nobody knows how to do this. There isn't one way. There's
how many times,
infinite ways,
have you seen a group in the control room spending the same amount of time talking about whether we should listen back to the take one more time or do the overdub?
Yeah.
When you're like, it just would have been done by now if you just did it.
Yeah. Yeah. And particularly, again, a band situation is a different thing. That's its own dynamic, right? That's you get a psychology degree, doing that. I've often said a record producer is either the highest paid musician or the lowest paid psychologist. It's Yeah, I mean, the guy's calling you at 3 o'clock. And when I used to do records for major labels, and then the artist is calling you freaking out. You can't keep that vocal out. I don't want anybody to hear that. God, Anyway, but I understand, it's an emotional thing, right? And I don't want to come off like, Yoda or something, but I really, if I start feeling something, my first reaction to that now, no matter what it is, anger, frustration, whatever, in any situation, forget the studio. I mean, just anywhere. I'm like, whoa. Why am I choosing to experience this way? And sometimes it's legit. I'm not saying nothing should ever upset you or that some things aren't objectionable or whatever, but just acknowledge that even if your anger is righteous, you're still participating. You're choosing that,
Right.
And again, I think that of the role, this studio role, any of them, it's this like grateful servant role, which, but don't make any mistake. That doesn't mean you're a slave. Doesn't mean people can like mistreat you. But I can count on one hand the number of times, even with really volatile artists, that anybody in a studio situation has been out of line with me, Usually, especially if what you're putting out there is I'm on your team and I'm here to help you, and you know what I mean? Just the unspoken part of that, just the vibe, the energy you enter the room with, right? I realize it's getting a little far afield. But,
no, it's good. I mean, the mindset stuff is really helpful on the show too.
Well, in the energy, that's what a recording session is about ultimately. I mean, it's sure the notes are important and sure the technical stuff's important, but you capture like a magic performance.
Mm-hmm.
If your rack tom mic is crapping out, so what?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If the thing goes a little askew, but it's magic, so what?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just think that and that's one of the really beautiful things about this Nashville studio scene. The overwhelming majority of people that I do work with and have worked with through 3 decades now, everybody's there. They're a pro and they're there for that purpose. And they do bring a really great attitude to the thing. It's not a put on. They're not blowing any smoke up your skirt. They're there to do great work, and I've discussed this with some of my friends. I think you give less than 100%, you're only cheating yourself. You're not hurting anybody else,
Missing an opportunity to create something great. New
well,
and
you're
different.
disrespecting your own abilities, whatever they are. You're going to phone it in? I mean, what's that about, right?
So thinking about what you said about the energy and, the importance of headphones and, in a way, making the studio recording, like Richard Dodd said on this podcast, just don't get in the way of the music as the recording and the engineer. It's like making all of that transparent enough so that the energy can come from the musicians through to the speakers. And I think about like, even the comment you made about, buying up lots of plugins and forgetting about the headphones. There's a tendency for us to think that we can, play musical gods and manipulate things in the control room as mixers and producers, when the truth is a microphone can capture an infinite number of sounds. And if you can just put up a microphone and allow a musician to deliver you an infinite number of possibilities, you've got this incredible palette of colors that you can create with.
Agreed.
And if you accidentally create, environments that are kind of throttling the musicians and their creative output, thinking you're going to, recreate that palette of colors in the control room, you're missing something.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I'll even go more woo-woo on you. I have felt for many, many years that, like, first of all, none of us that do this for a living ever, we don't even remember how to experience this as a civilian,
Right.
We really don't.
Yeah.
We're like the worst test market ever of anything. I remember years ago, riding in a car with my girlfriend, and she said, "Oh man, I love this song." And I said, "Really? I hate the reverb on the snare." And she was like, "What? The what?"
The what on the what?
But I couldn't get past that, right? So I'm the worst person in the world to, it's all subjective. But I really think when people say, I love this song or I love the melody or romantic lyric, what they really mean is this makes me feel something. That's the unspoken that's the universal language of music, you know.
And they probably mean the singer makes me feel something.
Well, or the song makes me feel something or whatever. And it might be sadness. It might be it doesn't have to be. It just makes them feel something that connects to their humanity on some level. And that's why songs will put you back to a place in time. You know, it does for me anyway. I mean, certain tunes are just anchored to a set of memories or a set of experiences, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And, you know, I guess it's important to note, too, what we're talking about here is, you know, live studio recording with a bunch of musicians. I mean, I think if you're producing stuff in the box like one of my sons does, he doesn't need to worry about the headphone mix. He should buy the plugins.
Right, exactly,
I mean? Yeah, that's a whole different mission, you know. But I do hope that this part of that never goes away. Because
but I will add to that. I will add to that and bring that studio musician thing into the control room. So for creating in the box and creating sounds, I do think that you still have that element that's needed of like musical flow and expression. It just becomes a new instrument. It's just now the laptop is the instrument, or the computer keyboard and the plugins and the MIDI stuff.
Yeah.
And that's why, you know, you see somebody, you know, hitting out a beat on some pads and it's got this great feel and you're like, wow, you know, where'd that come from?
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And again, I'm not an anti-technology guy at all, you know, but there's always this sort of pendulum swing of that stuff. So I remember, you know, when the MIDI stuff first became kind of functional in the 80s, all of a sudden everything was tied up to like an Oberheim sequencer, you know, and it was the most lifeless thing in the world. It was its own thing and it was cool. But then that swings back where that just becomes one, like you said, another instrument or another tool that you have to use, you know.
Was there a period where the bass community was afraid of the Moog Taurus pedal?
I don't remember that, but there was a period where the live musician community was afraid of disco, you know. It really affected live.
How so? You mean because of the programmed aspect or because of the
when the disco,
everybody, here's your one part that you're supposed to play?
No, when the disco thing came on, like, you know, a lot of clubs that had featured live music suddenly had a DJ,
vinyl.
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it was a thing.
So was that kind of part of the fuel for the I Hate Disco movement too? Sure. Yeah, us musicians were always stirring things up, aren't we?
Well, and a lot of that came from radio guys. You know, that were tired of being told to spin the same 25 songs or whatever.
You mean the 25 songs that were made on the mixing console that used to be sitting right behind me that recorded Hotel California and Staying Alive and Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah,
and
man.
Do You Think I'm Sexy? And,
No, you know, look, and you know, again, I'm circumspect about that. I listened back to some of that disco stuff. Those are great records, you know.
Yeah.
I just disliked them at the time because I was kind of a rock guy, and I'm like, oh man, you know, this is
funny how the styles, they just keep changing. They just keep moving and they come around again too. Yeah. What about that? What do you want to say to the cycle of the value of music making gear and equipment, whether it's instruments or, you know, studio stuff? Have you seen things go in and out of fashion and then come back into fashion again?
Yeah.
I mean, that 60s P bass is almost a good example of that.
Yeah.
Although it probably never went out of fashion.
Well, if it did, it shouldn't have, you know. I mean, but then again, you know, you look at that, like Leo didn't play the guitar. I don't think he could tune one. And he guessed about the scale of that bass. So again, I'm asking you, do I love that because it's on every record that I loved? Or do I love it because it's great? Or do I think it's great because it was, I mean, it doesn't matter. Who really
cares,
at the end of the day,
as long as you love it.
That's just this sort of serendipitous thing to me of like, you know, he decided that.
Leo probably liked or didn't like basses because of the reverb on the snare.
Probably. Yeah. No, or something, you know, he was a radio repair guy, right?
That's funny. Yeah.
I mean, you know, the other adjunct to that is like if engineers built guitar amps, they wouldn't break up. They wouldn't distort.
Right. They'd be perfectly
We'd
clean.
We'd be miserable, you know? But I think the biggest shocker to me, this really is a shock to me. First of all, I started buying guitars and stuff when there wasn't any vintage market because they were new, you know? And then when that started to become a thing, I guess maybe even in the late 80s or early 90s when they started saying, hey, maybe these 59 Les Paul standards are a thing, you know? And there was a guy in Tucson, Rainbow Guitars still there, that was one of the first guys I knew, Harvey Maltz, that was, you know, he could call Clapton and say, I've got something you want. You know, it's kind of the Gruen of out there.
Mm-hmm.
And Gruen's guitars for you rock stars, is the premier probably vintage dealer in the world, I would think. That's really, a local company.
Used to be downtown. Now they're sort of on the outskirts of town.
Prentice,
not even outskirts.
Prentice Avenue.
Oh, on Prentice Avenue.
Yeah.
Prentice.
But George Gruhn's a guy that if he appraises your instrument, that'll stand up in court for an insurance claim and stuff. I mean, he's pretty world renowned.
I have a red Guild mahogany acoustic that I bought at Gruhn's. I needed an acoustic. I went around. I was like, I'm going to, price is no object. And I looked at all these guitars and I didn't like any of the new acoustic guitars. They all had no life. And then I found this one from 79 at Gruhn's and I was like,
well, somebody beats it into submission first, and that's important for the wood to open up. Anyway, what I was going to say is, so I started to understand this like vintage guitar, vintage amp thing, right? I started to get that. And I understood some of that is just the scarcity. Some of it's like the antique value, But the thing that really, when we went to like electronic keyboards, like DX7s and Juno 60s and all this stuff, I thought, well, these are never going to be vintage because they'll be recreated as VSTs, which they all have been.
Yeah.
And then I saw that like somebody's selling them like a mini Moog for $7,000, and that's what they're going for. That doesn't make any sense to me, but I'm thrilled that so that's a surprise to me, though. You were saying, is that a surprise? Like vintage keyboards, I mean, a mini Moog was the coolest thing in the world. I bought one from the Moog factory in 1971, I think.
Wow. You still got it?
It was down by Buffalo. No, I had it for years. I think I sold it for $600 or $700, in the like, well, because it's a stone knife. I mean, it's cool, but, they'd gone on to programmable, you know what I mean? Like, you had charts, you're like flipping oscillators between songs and it's one note at a time. And so, it was cool for
now your kids they're like, Dad, you did what?
Oh yeah. I sold a Juno 60. My sons have never forgiven me. I didn't think I thought it would be a big deal. I sold it for $1,000 or something.
That's so funny.
Anyway, that was a surprise to me. And it still seems kind of goofy to me, actually.
So tell us about your studio today. Do you have a studio?
I do. Yeah.
What are some of the tools that you like to have around you to work?
Sure. So a lot of my business, thankfully, has morphed into online. I still do a lot of sessions on the ground here, but over the last decade, I kind of started to cultivate that, and then it kind of grew into a thing. And I record a lot of bass and keys, essentially, from the house. And my older son is a pretty successful studio drummer here, and he can record drums from the house. And my youngest son is a guitar savant, but I can't get him to work for me anymore. Anyway, but it's a very project studio. Like we don't record together, it's just a big room in my house.
Just go in and do overdubs.
Yeah, but so the mostly what I send are bass tracks or key tracks. I can do piano and Hammond and all that stuff from them since at the house. Most of it onboard stuff. Most of it.
How does something like that work? Does a session start with a guide track and it goes to the drummer first and then comes to you?
That's what's fun about it. So I was on this tour in 2013, and it was the nature of that thing. I just had a lot of downtime. We would park this thing for a couple of weeks, and then it was the reunion of Young Rascals. Really long story. That was the thing I did with Steven Van Zandt. It was an amazing experience for me. So I went from being the kid in the audience drooling to meeting these guys and being the only bass player that's ever played.
So Steven Van Zandt was in the Young Rascals?
No, he resurrected. He and Springsteen. So you need to understand, in that period of time, the Rascals were the Beatles of America. They were the East Coast, especially the East Coast thing. And coincidentally, he and Springsteen both saw them the same night. They didn't know each other yet. But that was, in Steven's mind, that was the first real rock band. I mean, he was just blown out, as I was. And so many years later, they were Steven inducted them into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And it's worth looking up on YouTube because it's one of the best induction speeches ever.
And if the rock stars don't know, Steven is a member of the E Street Band, Bruce's band.
And Little Steven in the Disciples of Soul. I mean, he's Lilyhammer. I mean, he's
I love the Lilyhammer.
He's a Renaissance man.
And believe it or not, I actually discovered him through The Sopranos. I didn't.
Well,
and then I was like, oh, he's in a band.
So he did this induction speech, which is quintessential Stevie, right?
Yeah.
And the next morning, from what he told me, David Chase called him and said, "Have you ever done any acting?" And he said, no. And he said, I got a role for you. And he was in every episode of The Sopranos. I mean, it's life-changing.
Wow.
But he'd never been an actor before that. It's just, if you see his persona doing this induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, like Chase went, that's the guy I need to be Silvio Dante,
That's amazing.
And then Stephen, but the experience I had with him, it became part of his, he really wanted the Rascals to get their due. And he's correct that they did not. So that was such a fertile music period. Their list of hits covers such a broad area of music. They did You Better Run and People Gotta Be Free and Good Lovin' and stuff. But then they also did this song called, How Can I Be Sure? That's almost like a crooner ballad, and Groovin', and It's a Beautiful Morning. And, it's such a wide bag. And singles were released so quickly in that period of time that, I don't think people understood that it was the same band doing all these things in a way. And their period of time together was pretty short-lived, 4 or 5 years. And, the songs certainly have the life and the notoriety, but Stephen wanted the band to get their due. This was a dream of his, right? And he was able to, cajole them all into getting back together for this show that he had put together called Once Upon a Dream, which is the title of one of their records. And it was this multimedia thing, like 100-foot video wall, and he had pre-recorded the guys telling their story. It was the reunion of this band after 45 years or whatever, all the original members. And it told their story, and it was all the music, and he went into deep cuts. The show was 2 hours and 15 minutes long.
Wow.
And it was amazing, and for, we did it in the Northeast at first, and then we took it all over the country.
And it was a stage presentation.
Yeah, we did it like at the Richard Rodgers Theater on Broadway for 6 weeks or whatever, and then what I was starting to say about that, I could go on about that forever, but we would go to a city and maybe set up, in a theater for 2 weeks and do 5 shows a week. I had all this time on my hands, and so I used that to really reach out to a lot of my recording clientele that even from like the West Coast, but Canada and Australia and England and France, people used to come over here like crazy in the 90s. And they still had a recording budget, but they didn't have a flight budget and a hotel budget and a studio, so I just had all this time on my hands. And so either calling or emailing or reaching out and just sort of beginning to develop, I had already started that, but I wanted to really kind of amp it up. And that turned out to be great. And then 3 or 4 years ago, I was approached by these guys. There's a company out in New York called Sound Better. There are several of them. Those guys, I've hooked up with 2 or 3 of them, but those guys have really done it right, in my opinion. Just the entire facilitation, and most of that site is about mix engineers and people who write top lines and stuff. But I've, dominated the base page there, and
that's great.
It's really, really been fabulous, So there's just this constant stream from my existing clientele and from that I'm able to do from home. So that to say, I have a very efficient studio for the things that I want to do.
Yeah.
And my wife, as you know, is a pretty phenomenal singer. So a lot of the stuff that we've done with her, whether she's doing backgrounds for somebody else or her own records, we do all of that at the house too, And then I farm that off to somebody to mix because first of all, I can't. And second, I don't want to know how, that somebody should do that. That's as interested in that as I am in the things that I do.
Yeah. It's fun to collaborate on records too, to work with. I love it when I get a chance to work with another mixer and another mastering engineer and, hire a band and all that. It's fun to be a part of a team making a great sounding record.
And to answer your earlier question, so what's really interesting about all this online stuff is it comes in all shapes and sizes. And several of the people that I worked with first, were guys that had been here as writers and producers and stuff. And so, I would often get that last, which was so cool for me. Like one guy in particular in Canada, Joel Feeney, that, he's a good keyboard player, but he'd just play some kind of placeholder key bass, just the tonics or whatever. But by the time I'd get this thing, it had a finished vocal, it had finished drums. So, usually I'm the first guy done in a tracking situation. And there's, over time, you learn there's a certain reluctance to step out in certain places if you're not sure where the singer's going to be. Right. But getting some of these things as the last guy to go down, and, a lot of McCartney's thing was like that too. He'd play placeholder stuff, but then he'd play the bass track to something or whatever. He was the last guy to go on, It's so much fun to play to a completed track, but I'm just as happy to start it too. I mean, sometimes I'll just get a scratch acoustic guitar and some kind of a drum loop, and the acoustic guitar is not even in time with the drum loop, and you create something to that. So there's no set thing.
If you are mixing music, podcasts, or audio for video, and you want it to sound amazing, then iZotope has got your back. With RX, Ozone, Neoverb, Nectar, and Vocal Synth, you'll have a collection of powerful apps and plugins that will help you get a professional sound in no time. Whether you're looking to clean up your vocal recordings with RX, master your tracks with Ozone, or add depth and ambience to your mixes with Neoverb, iZotope is your magic wand for awesomeness. Plus, with Nectar and Vocal Synth, you can easily add creative effects and unique textures to your vocals and instruments. From subtle mix enhancements to extreme sound design, iZotope takes your music and podcast productions to the next level. Go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. So this is probably not that record. Maybe it is, but Michelle, right? For me, it's you. I had noticed. My question was, how often do you get to start the song with a bass slide or riff?
Right.
That particular song's like, the bass.
Well, there's a two-part answer. How often I get to do it is every time. How often it makes the record is never.
Nice.
But that was great. She's great, a Canadian artist. That was one of the first masters I think I got to play on down here. And she was a gas. It was really fun. I don't remember who produced that record, but I loved that they left the slide in.
How often does somebody say, let's do a bass solo here?
Other than as a joke, I don't think anyone's ever said that to me. The drums stop very bad right now. Bass solo, yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about just bass and what's appropriate for a song anyway. So other notes, I made Rock of Ages, Hymn and Faith, Amy Grant and Vince Gill. You just have these steady, long bass notes, very clear whole notes, and the appropriateness of when to play a sustaining note versus notes that start and stop.
Yeah.
I mean, I like to describe it as dumb and basic because I sometimes think we forget to think about these things,
Well, here's what I think about that pretty much. And again, it involves stylistic things, because if there's something that's, like a Muscle Shoals kind of R&B thing, that it's important that the bass have that pattern active James Jamerson kind of thing, who, by the way, still the undisputed king of the world.
Yeah, Motown.
But again, this, not to be Mr. Cliche, but it's like listen to the song, and see what it needs. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think in a lot of cases, it doesn't need as much as you're thinking, and so again, in a studio situation, that's a skill you develop, and you kind of go that way. And, sometimes I check in. Typically, if nobody is saying to me, if nobody comments on it, especially where you're dealing with a producer that knows what they're doing, I figure the part's right. Like, I don't need to go, hey, what about me,
Right. Or you're like, hey, by the way, I was doing this one thing on the second chorus, and I did a little different from the first chorus, and I was wondering, do you like that? Or which pickup do you like? I'm like, come on, man. I will
never say any of that.
It wasn't a problem until you started talking about it.
Right. But with the, I think a lot of again, having done this a long time, I guess, it's just kind of some of the experiential chops you develop. You just sort of have a sense, you listen to the singer and you kind of listen to what else is going on, and you decide where you belong in there. Yeah. And, I'm probably 75% of the time right out of the chute, and sometimes now, because we have the ability, I'll say, hey, I got another idea. You want to give me a playlist or a second pass just so you have it or whatever? With the online stuff, what I love to do, especially with clients that I haven't worked for very much, is I'll play like what my instinctive take on it, my sort of stream of consciousness. You know, I'll listen to the song and write a little chart and go, okay, go, right? But then I'll give them, depending on the song, I'll give them a real simple pass. It'll be whole notes in the intro and, you know, half notes in the second verse and chorus. So they have all those things they could use.
Yeah.
And then often, depending on the song, I'll give them like a way over the top, like self-indulgent pass. Because they might find one passage between sections that's really cool out of that. And if I do them all at the same time, it's the same instruments, same signal chain, they could just, cuss and paste, as I like to say. And, but that's such a cool thing. And in the online world, again, that's sort of perceived as a value-added thing, which it is.
Yeah.
But for me, if we've got a 3-minute song, it takes me 10 minutes to do those 3 passes.
Yeah.
They have all these options. I don't have to go back 3 days later and
re-edit it,
patch something new in.
Yeah.
It's kind of a win-win deal for both of us, but I love being able to do that because, again, depending on what the pace is on an on-the-ground session, I don't always say, hey, let me give you a second pass because we got to move on.
Yeah, it's a good point. So it's a testament to the difference between when it is or isn't appropriate to leave a decision for later. It's easy for us to go like, people forgot how to commit to things, and that does happen way too often in the studio. But in the example of doing an online overdub, it's actually, like you said, a value added. It's like, look, you can't be here at the same time, and I can't be there at the same time. So let me give you 3 passes with the least active to the most active.
Right.
And let you, and then, probably I'm guessing you give them something where you say, this is the one I think is most appropriate.
Yeah, I always say, hey, this is the one, this is kind of my instinctive take on it. But then here's a super simple one. And then here's one I'll say to them. Here's a notice me overindulgent, over the top thing, but there might be a moment of lightning in there,
Yeah, yeah.
And I would say that 95% of the time that gets it done. Unless my take on it is just wrong.
Yeah.
And if it is, then I'll just do it again. It doesn't, but that's the response from, again, I'll never meet any of these people, all these online clients. I feel like I know a lot of them because what I have also noticed is that I get a lot of repeat stuff. And I think some of that has to do with, and this is not some sort of, false modesty, but a lot of people don't really know what bass does, so if you kind of play the right notes and it moves the song along, they're like, oh, this is awesome.
Right. And
that was easy. And the guy did what he said he would. And I'll address that in a minute. And so they just don't, next time around, they don't look, this is great. I'll come to you till you send me something I hate, I guess, so that's all really cool. But to that point, I do want to say this about the online thing. Cause I think that's, that's an undeniable part of the future of all of this.
Yeah.
My wife sang on a Rod Stewart record last year, I think, had they weren't going to fly her to England and they weren't going to send a tape over here. I mean, the only way that could have happened is the way we do this.
Do you think I'm sexy now still? Is that the title?
No, it was some orchestral thing. And she did like an operatic thing. It was really, really cool. Anyway, but my point being that this technology enables a lot of things.
Yeah.
Everything's a give and take, but it really enables the ability to do a lot of things that we never could do before, and but here's the thing I want to say to any musician or engineer or singer or anybody out there listening to this, that it gets involved with that. Or even in live, I guess this is just sort of business advice about probably business, but certainly about being a musician. So much of this is about managing expectations, And what I really mean by that is if you tell somebody you're going to deliver a track to them the day after tomorrow, deliver the track to them the day after tomorrow. And if for some reason you can't, tell them before that.
Mm-hmm.
Shoot them a note or say, hey, look, I meant to do this, but I had an equipment thing go down. I had that happen to me with the power outage. I had something roached. I mean, I've protected and everything else.
Yeah.
I had to go to a couple of people and say, hey, this is going to be a couple of days. But don't if I agree to deliver your track Wednesday, you shouldn't be emailing me Friday asking where your track is. And that sounds so elemental and so basic, but I find that creative people, that's kind of a missing piece. And it's not just in music. I mean, I've been trying to hire plumbing contractors. I can't get to call me back,
Yeah.
But so much of that is just about that. You call somebody and say, look, I know I promised this, but I can't deliver. I'll have it to you by whatever. Everybody's cool with that, particularly if that's not your MO, If you're somebody who shows up and does what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it, when you have times that you can't, everybody's fine with that.
Yeah. I have stuff like that too, where a client says, like, hey, what's next? And we're going to tune some vocals and then do a mix. And sometimes I struggle because I'm like, I don't think I'm going to do it today. I'm going to do it tomorrow. Maybe I'll get to it next week. And, just depending on schedule and other projects going on. And it's like, inevitably, I find it is more helpful to at least communicate something. Just say, look, I'm going to get to it. I'm excited about it. I can't, next
just
week.
Just manage their expectation.
Yeah.
Don't
something to count on.
Blow smoke at them, just be reliable. So this is kind of a joke, but it's not. I've had occasion over time I've got a friend that teaches music at ASU, and I'll lecture his class sometimes. And this is kind of tongue in cheek, but it's the truth. I've always said to young musicians, look, be early, be sober, wear a clean shirt. If you can get those three things right, you're ahead of 95% of the field. And it's really true, by that. I mean, just like, if there's a 10 o'clock session, you're late at 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Be there at 9. You're supposed to start playing at 10.
It's downbeat at 10, right?
They should have heard your stuff. I had to go through this with my son, who's the drummer, who's great. And when I eventually got him in on stuff, we had a day where, he showed up at 9:30 or something. And when the session was over, and it was fine. But I said, hey, look, it's your job to be here at 9 o'clock for a 10 o'clock session. That's all. You'll run through the drums 90% of the time. You'll be done in 5 minutes and you'll have to drink coffee and wait for the rest of us. But the one day that there's something screwed up in the 13 mics they've got, 9:30 is too late.
Yeah.
So I just need you, if you want to be in this game, that's part of this. And he got it right away. Said, yep, don't worry about it again. And he's awesome in that way,
Yeah.
But I've seen guys get blown out of the scene for that. You can't show up at 5 after 10 because there's somebody who's just as good as you that'll be there on time. That seems so elemental. It seems so simple, but I love musicians and I am one, but part of our reputation for sort of being shiftless is deserved,
Yeah, well, and also because the record making, when you're talking about live musicians, is a group of people working together, and there's a lot of moving targets that all need to get organized just right.
Yeah.
And, to get everybody on a session.
Well, and it's respect to the other people that are there too,
Let me ask you this. Yeah. We're near the end here, but I wanted to ask you about bass, more bass low-end stuff.
Sure.
There's two parts to this question. One is, I was playing my synth bass the other day, and I'm just playing a few notes on the keyboard, and I was really struck by the hugeness of low end, just depending on some note choices.
Mm-hmm.
So like, if I played an E on the keyboard, which would be the low note, typical low note on a bass, but then I went, a few half steps down to the C below that, I was like, wow, that's some deep low end coming out of my speakers right now.
Yep.
But then if I kept going down, it was like, it all just kind of went away or something.
Right.
And talk to us just a little bit about, like, if you think it's a fair question, like where, the things as a producer and as somebody who wants what comes out of your speakers to sound big to you.
Right.
And how that correlates to choosing the right key, choosing the right notes on the instrument. How often is the low string, the fifth string on a bass, a good thing to have? And also, what note is that fifth string tuned to? Is it
B.
a B usually?
Yeah.
It's not even the C. It's below the C. It's just below the C.
Yeah. Right. So the first fret of that is the low C.
Yeah.
Right. So when the 5-string bass kind of came on the scene in the 80s, everybody became enamored of these new low notes and overused the shit out of them.
Yeah.
Right.
We can swear on this show.
Including me. Right. Yeah. It was just like, oh, wow, I got this low D. I'll use that, So I think as time goes by, again, you look at the track, you look at the song, you look at what else is going on in that area, that sonic area, and then you try to pick your moments. Like it's pretty exciting for a song that's in the key of C to introduce that super low C at the top of the second chorus or something. Like you haven't heard it yet, right?
Right. You're like saving a big,
and suddenly
line.
There's like this other thing going on, and then use it sparingly, let it still build to the end of the song, but don't play every C that comes up down there, right?
Right.
So that you build some, even if you octave or whatever, but so that you call some attention to that creates some excitement.
Yeah.
Yeah. And two, this is so geeky, but it's a thing of mine. So when the 5-string bass first came out, it was the same scale as 4-string bass, right? And those notes, like the D and the C sharp and the C, they're screwed up, So the analogy, I guess, is that string should be longer.
Right, like a piano.
And so the difference between like a baby grand and a 9-foot Bosendorfer or something.
Yeah.
And so you can wrap a string to make it be in that note, but the math is wrong. So again, you guys can't see me, but I see like the principal tone sort of as this line in the middle of the paper, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there are these sympathetic harmonics that are sort of equidistant above and below when the thing is correct, So once you get down to like the D and the C on a regular scale 5-string bass, again, to my ear, you can get the principle in tune, but that sympathetic stuff isn't really working with the track right. The rest of the way. I now have this longer scale. It's just a couple inches longer. Those low notes are so much more true. It's ridiculous,
Yeah.
And so when the geeky thing, the 5-string thing comes out, like sitting in a restaurant, with my girlfriend, and I'm like, oh man, I go, this song's in D and that note's wrong. It's just not right. It just, again, nobody
just
cares.
Hearing it over the radio,
just over the music thing. But I'm just like, it doesn't ring like an E or an F or something. It all of a sudden, and in a mix, you're wrangling that crap because the way it reacts to the piano, or the way it reacts to the kick drum, it's just a mess, and that's why, like in concert, the big upright contrabasses, like those guys have a string extender for their low note, because the physics of that are, if the string is actually longer, it's more correct.
How low do those basses go? B as well?
No.
Or lower?
I don't know. I actually don't. I think maybe might be A. I don't know. Those things are, I don't know if they're tuned like in fifths or fourths. Or
it's just fascinating. And then thinking about, the times where we're listening to a mix and we're like, I just wish, is this the right amount of low end? Does it need more low end? Does it not? And all those decisions. And then, the more we learn about this, the more we just discover that these are arrangement decisions. Really,
a lot of it's
we think they're EQ and compression choices when some of them are just arrangements.
And one of the anomalous things that I found, like we were talking about sort of tuning the singer with the volume in the headphones, a lot of times I'll get more low end out of the super low notes by cutting below 80 or something. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever the expression of that note is, it's like taking some of that ultra low stuff away makes it feel fuller and lower in the track. It's like sort of a reverse, Is
that something you would do in the recording stage, or that's more of a mix move?
Well, it's something when I send a track to somebody, my hope is that they can kind of plug it in there. They can drop it in the way I don't do a lot of EQing or anything, but I typically roll below, depends on the thing. I'll roll below, 80 or even 100 sometimes.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
If it feels right in the track to me. And that's about how it reacts with the kick drum and all that stuff. It becomes much bigger in that reaction. So, again, soloed, it sounds like this massive thing. And then you try to put it with the other stuff that's down there and it gets all muddy and weird. And,
Do you know off the top of your head what some of the fundamental frequencies are for the low notes of a bass? If we don't have that, I don't have them memorized.
No. Like the A would be what, like 220 or 110 or whatever the division of 440 is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think probably I don't know.
There we go. We'll pull it up here.
Yeah, they'd be like 220, wouldn't it, or something like that?
Well, it's not coming up as quick as I hoped. All right, rock stars, drop a comment in and let us know where our fundamental frequencies
That's right.
are. I just don't have a chart in front of me.
Yeah.
But, knowing that stuff is so helpful. There's many times where I print that out and I just have a piece of paper around in the studio. Of course, there are a lot of plugins now that will show us that. So, the Fab Filter EQs.
Yeah.
I think
great stuff.
They pull up the keyboard below, and then, Isotope does this stuff.
Yeah.
You could be in Studio One by PreSonus, and they've got like a RTA analyzer on your mix chain, so you can see this.
Yeah, that's
really
so amazing, and all the
and
multi-band EQ stuff is so cool, it's
one of the things I do now, which is right behind me. It's not on right now, but I just took an old iPhone and I put it on a little clip, like a car clip, but it's on the console. And, instead of like chucking it or thinking, what do I do with this old thing? Then I load in a Decibel app and I just have that running and it's plugged in.
Right.
So it's just using the mic on the phone, but it's got a little real-time analyzer on it. So I'm seeing levels of my speaker while I'm working.
Right.
Make sure I'm not too loud or just kind of, or
cool.
even too quiet,
Yeah.
And then at the same time, it even shows the frequencies, and I can be like, I can hum a note. I could solo the bass for a second and just look in that, and you can see where that fundamental is, and it's just really remarkable.
Right.
It might be a little too small for me to read what frequency it actually was.
Yeah,
but hey,
it's all right.
That's for another podcast.
It's the thought
right
that counts, right? Yeah.
Do you ever feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take you years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David, quote, "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process that I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, but condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session," close quote. Look, I'm so confident that this will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick. And I'll see you at the front row table of the Grammys. Cheers. Well, all right, dude. So let me see here. Tell us a little bit before we close out with the closing question. You've also worked with Lyle Lovett.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about those sessions. What are some things you really enjoy about Lyle's music?
So I met Lyle at the very beginning of his career, and I was in Arizona playing in this band, and I had just been hired to play keyboards in this band, and I was hired there because Matt Rawlings, who's this child, Matt's a dear friend, but I've known him since he was 15 or 16, and he's just a savant. And he was playing with these guys, and he was now college age, and he was going to go to Berkeley. So he left and took the summer off, and these guys asked me to play with them. It was one of the very best, another big musical mentor, this guy that ran that band. Anyway, they had met Lyle. Just before I joined that band, they had met Lyle overseas. They got a chance to play some American country music festival in Luxembourg or something. And Lyle was over there performing by himself, and nobody was paying any attention to him. And they befriended him and wrote charts and said, well, we'll just back you. And so when he came in, Lyle, to that point, to my knowledge, had, been sort of a coffee house artist in Texas, played with a percussionist or with a guy that played cello or something, but he didn't have a band. He didn't play in bands. So he started coming over to Phoenix to do song demos with this guy that was in the band I was in named Billy Williams. So he had started to come over and record at this same studio I'm talking about where the Meat Puppets were. And Matt had left. So I ended up playing piano on, I guess, 3 or 4 of the tunes on this thing. And in a incredibly unlikely music business story, Lyle took those demos that we did over there and he came to Nashville and got a writing deal with them at Criterion, which was a pretty cool publisher, Rodney Crowell and stuff. And my understanding is they in turn shopped that around to get him a record deal. And this gentleman is passed now, but he was one of the music business guys I really liked, this guy named Dick Whitehouse, who ran MCA in LA. Lawyer, super funny, great guy, loved him, man. Anyway, he said, okay, this is something. And he signed it and sent it down here to Tony Brown, who was not Tony Brown yet. He kind of was. He was Bowen's right-hand man. And they kind of did some overdubs and remixed it. And that was the record. So suddenly, I mean, that just never happens. That's the most, especially then in the 84, I think it was, or something. The Nashville thing was, okay, we love this. We're going to start all over again,
right,
you know?
Right.
And for whatever reason, I don't know if Dick ordered that or if Tony was cool enough to see that it was cool, but they just did that. And that was my, experience with Lyle. And he would come to Phoenix and get up and play with us. And Lyle, if you're listening, you know I love you. It's so impressive to me. He was a really, really shy person. And he'd come into this club, big country nightclub we played in, and people loved us. So if we said, hey, this is our new guy, they loved him. But, that was an uncomfortable circumstance for him. He didn't do that. And I remember him being, pretty uncomfortable with it and pretty nervous. And then, 3 years later, he's like one-upping Letterman and stuff. And we have kept in touch over the years. And it's longer ago than I think it was whatever, but maybe 5 years ago, there was a project here where they were re-recording Billy Joel things, and the producer called me and Lyle sang, She's Always a Woman, I think. And we hadn't seen each other in a long time. And it was a really cool reunion. Lyle and I always got along really, really well. I've seen him on the road a couple of times. And I think he's a guy that has just carved his own path. I'm just time. In all ways, but I mean, I'm just really knocked out at the way he's done that. And, reinvented himself several times. He'll go do these, duo gigs with Vince Gill or Willis Allen Ramsey or Robert Earl Keen or some of these guys. And then he has the large band, which is, I mean, that's a love gig. I can't imagine what the overhead.
But it's Lyle Lovett and his very large band.
And his large band, yeah.
His large band, yeah.
And those were all Phoenix guys, the guitar player originally, or all the guys from the band that I was in.
That's great.
And this great singer named Francine Reed, who came in out there to sing on these demos. And then a couple of her lines on a couple of those songs are kind of the quintessential thing, and it just turned into a thing.
That's a trip, man.
Yeah.
That's a trip.
Yeah.
Well, in the interest of staying somewhat close to our length of the podcast, let me jump to our closing question. So this one's hypothetical.
Okay.
But we get to take the Wayback Studio machine.
I love it.
You go back in time, jib, 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 and you go back and find young Mark, who's maybe just going to see the Rascals play for the first time or something like that. And you walk in, you say, listen, dude, I've come back in time to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing that you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. Yeah. What advice would you go back and give yourself? I mean, of course, you got kids now, too.
You're the cat on the date.
You're the cat on the date.
I mean, seriously, that is sort of the quintessential piece of advice. And I think that within that phrase, it says, honor your own talent, have some self-respect, have some respect for the other people you're with, help the artist bring their vision to life beyond their expectation if you can. It ain't about you, You go in and you do the best work you can possibly do, and then you leave, and it's not, whatever happens after that has nothing to do with you.
That's great.
This is your role,
That's great.
You're the cat on the date. God bless you, Hal. Hal died last year, but he was a huge mentor to me and pushed me to move down here.
Wow.
He said, studio musicians, there's an extra little gear and you got it. And you do a lot of recording here, but you don't make records, and you should go somewhere where they do. And I thought, wow, if this guy thinks so, maybe I should believe him,
Yeah, that's cool, man.
Yeah, and we kept in touch over the years. He was a very, very, very special human. And
I think that reminder too of you're the cat on the date.
Yeah.
Just applying that to everything we do. I mean, even when you've learned it,
Yep.
I find I have to reapply it all the time.
Sure.
And it's that ability to also just let go of stuff.
Absolutely. You don't,
thing.
I figured out, and a lot of it was demos here in the 90s, but, I've probably played on 30,000 plus tracks. I don't have to win every time. You know what I mean? And I do find that the more open-minded I am, like I said, somebody will throw out some idea that seems goofy, and then you try and you go, hey, this is pretty rad, and I wouldn't have thought of this.
Yeah.
But I will next time. You know what I mean? This is now be an arrow that, another weapon I have, right?
Nice.
So,
and then that's what happened when you first started a song with the bass slide, and then you're like,
I start them all with the bass slide. That's just the one that made the record. That's all.
That's great. I love it. Well, let the rock stars know, how can they find out more about you? Where would you like them to go? What if they're ready to produce their next hit record and they just need a killer bass overdub or drum overdub?
Okay. I've got the catch-all site is I've got a site called markprenticemusic.com. It's a pretty elementary website, but you can catch me there to have me play a track for you. You can also catch me there to produce a project for you. And I do a very limited amount of kind of mentoring, career counseling. I love doing that, but there's a kind of a pre-interview thing, because I don't want to waste your time or your money. And some people aren't, sufficiently far along enough in their career for what I have to offer to help them,
Right.
And it's saying it ain't for everybody, but it's a coaching role, and a lot of tough love,
Yeah. Nice.
Because it's, I want people to get results, or I don't want to, this isn't about, right.
Yeah.
So there are people at certain points in their career where I can really help them kind of, amp that up in a quantum sort of way.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then you're also on Sound Better as well.
Yeah, and
right?
if you want to track, that page links you to Sound Better. But yeah, if you want to go to soundbetter.com and just go to the bass page.
Right on.
And those guys are, as a resource for a lot of things, I find them to be really, really good cats.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll get you a little sponsorship money or something.
Sounds good, man. We'll do it.
Yeah.
Sound Better is very cool. And I've got friends that are using it all the time.
Yeah.
I haven't quite gone there yet myself, just as an engineer.
Well, and it's like anything else. You can set up an account there and everything, but you still, you still have to go tell people you're there.
Yeah, exactly.
Another thing that musicians don't particularly like to do, toot their own horn, but that's how,
I just want to play guitar.
Yeah, that's how it all gets done, right?
Yeah. Well, dude, thanks so much for hanging with us on Recording Studio Rockstars. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, brother.
Of course, I'll hopefully see you around soon, because we like to get together and just talk about other things in the world.
Absolutely.
And what we can do about it, which is...
and you play your cards right, you can come to the Christmas party next year.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right.
Hey, thank you, Lidge. This was great, man.
Yeah, my pleasure, dude. Rockstars, thanks for listening. We'll see you guys in the next episode. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lidge Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: OWC, Lewitt, Adam Audio, Isotope, and Spectra 1964. And remember, at isotope.com/rockstars, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, then please check out our sponsors using the link in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Braden Stremming, for additional podcasts and video production. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.